get started, I have one confession to make, and that is if you had told me a year ago that I would be standing up here tonight in Oldham County for a heroin forum, I would have probably given you the blankest stare and thought I have no idea what you're talking about, because heroin wasn't really on my personal radar. I knew that it was out there. Occasionally you hear of a famous person that ODs on heroin. I had heard that and had some understanding that heroin had become a problem in some of the counties in northern Kentucky, but that wasn't a very good understanding. And then last July, I was appointed to the Kentucky Court of Appeals, and my district has 21 counties. And one of the first things that I did after I got on the bench was travel around and meet with judges, local officials, law enforcement, prosecutors, and I was really wanting to just get a handle on what was going on in the local communities, get to know people, find out if there were any issues with the administration of justice, because that was part of my job. I expected to hear maybe our law library needs some more books, or we've got a crack in the sidewalk outside the courthouse. Can you do anything to help us? But what I heard was heroin, time after time after time, in county after county after county. What I heard was, we are in the middle of a heroin epidemic. Our young people are dying, our crime rates are increasing, we don't know how to get people help. It's affecting our entire community. And so I decided that I needed to educate myself more on those issues. And I attended a couple of forums very similar to this in northern Kentucky. And at one of those, I had the great privilege of hearing Charlotte Wethington speak. Charlotte is a school teacher. She's a wife. Her husband's an engineer. She is a good mother. They live in a nice neighborhood. She was involved in her children's lives. Charlotte is also the mother of Casey Wethington, who died of a heroin overdose. That hit home with me when I heard Charlotte speak, because Charlotte, I could be Charlotte. And then I met so many other parents who had lost children, or who had young people or loved ones that were struggling with heroin addiction. I would get messages on my Facebook. And I felt like that as a mother and as a public servant, I had to do something. I couldn't just stand by and listen as people were telling me about how heroin was ripping their communities apart. I couldn't build a treatment center. I'm not a doctor. There were a lot of things that I wasn't. But what I did have is a voice. And I decided to use that voice every opportunity I got to talk about this issue. Because whether we talk about it or not, heroin is here. It's in our schools, right here in Oldham County. It's in our neighborhoods. It's in our backyard. It's not somebody else's problem. It's our problem. And ignoring it will not make it go away. And I believe that by talking about it, by raising awareness, that is a vital component of combating the heroin epidemic. And I use the word epidemic because it truly is an epidemic. Heroin is in our nation's headlines. These are just a few that I pulled off of a Google search I did. How heroin kills you, just saying heroin is king again. How to fight the heroin epidemic. Spike in hepatitis C cases blamed on heroin use. And it's not just in the nation's headlines, it's in Kentucky's headlines. Lexington officials continue seeing disturbing trends. Kentucky must act now against heroin. Heroin overdoses rise as painkiller overdoses drop. Richmond police, I've never heard of it being this big, ever. And as I was preparing for this event on Tuesday night, I was making a post on Facebook with the flyer, and I got a message from one of my friends in Grant County. And she told me that a member of their community, a 21-year-old single mother, had just died that day of a heroin overdose. If it can happen in Grant County, it can happen in Oldham County, and it is happening here, and that's why we're here tonight. We're going to start our panel off with a local family who has courageously volunteered to come forward and share their story with heroin addiction. Abby is a very courageous young woman. She's a graduate of South Oldham High School, and she's a recovering heroin addict. And her mother, Natalie, and her father are also going to speak tonight and to share their story. And I think it's a story that is worth hearing, because as you hear their story, I think you'll find that you could very easily be that family. There's nothing that makes any of us immune from heroin, not how much education we have or how much money we make or what neighborhood we live in or what county we live in. None of us are immune from that. And so I think Abby is going to go first, and I welcome them to the stage. I turn it over to them to share their story, because it's an important story and it's one that we all need to hear.
I'm a grateful recovering addict named Abby. I was asked to come up here tonight and tell you guys a little bit about my story. I think I should start out with before the drugs ever entered my life. I grew up in a family of 7 in Oldham County. I've lived here since I was 13. I feel that my childhood was a blessed one. I had both parents in my home. I had horses and show them. I got to be part of a 4-H group where we went and we judged horses, and I was pretty good at it. I actually was 10th in the country when I was finished. After high school, I went on to college. I got recruited from a few different colleges to play soccer, but I chose to go to a school where they specialized in my degree. Did really well my first year. I got good grades, had friends, lived in the dorms. But somewhere along the line, drugs entered my life. And I have to tell you, even though I achieved a lot of things as a kid, I always ran from my problems. I ran from anything negative, any feelings I didn't like, any hardships, any struggles. I ran and filled my time with anything and everything but Abby and her problems. And that's kind of where my problem lied. When I found the drugs, the first time I'll tell you, I didn't like it. I tried a pill, and I was peer pressured into doing it, and I hated every single second of it. It made me sick. I got hives, I sweat all night, I didn't sleep, and I hated it. The second time I tried it, ironically, I tried it with a needle. And for those of you that really know me, know I'm that patient cowering in the corner from the nurse saying, "Get away from me with that needle." And I loved it. It was the best numbing agent I have ever felt. It numbed me to my core. I didn't have to feel. I didn't have to think. I didn't have to worry. Nothing could bother me. And I was hooked. One was way too many, and I couldn't get enough. It started out kind of like a every other night, maybe every night, became an every day, all day kind of thing. And when I started using, I can tell you that where I was in my life emotionally was a very dark place. I felt like the black sheep of my family. Felt like nothing I could ever do would be good enough. My self-perfectionism was eating me alive. I was working jobs, and I've worked jobs since I was 16. I owned my own car, had an apartment. You know, it seemed like to the outside world I had it all together, but on the inside I was falling apart. And eventually my using ended me up in a place where the heroin was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It got to a point where it was to choose whether to eat lunch that day or to get some more heroin. And the obvious choice to me was the heroin, because it was the solution to all my problems. It fixed anything that I felt that I couldn't run from. You can't run from yourself, so I numbed myself. It really was pathetic. It demoralized me to such a place that I would never wish on my worst enemy. I would go to bed at night and I would wake up in the morning crying because I hurt so bad. Heroin is not just a mentally addictive substance, it is physically addictive. The withdrawals suck. So I did anything and everything I could think of to just stay feeling normal. Because once you've used for so long, you're not getting high anymore. You're just trying to stay normal and not sick. So a lot of my morals went out the window. I hurt people. I ran from my friends. I isolated. I got really, really skinny. I lost like 30 pounds in 2 months. My parents had no idea. They thought I had an eating disorder. It just took me to a really dark place. And at night, I would prepare for the morning, and I would wake up in the morning, and the first thing I would reach for was the syringe with the little orange cap sitting next to my bed, just to get out of bed. Work didn't matter, friends didn't matter, family didn't matter, school didn't matter until I had that first one in me. It was a sad, sad place to be in. My grades fell off, my relationships with people dissolved. I was volatile at best. And so my family, I finally ended up telling them. I remember distinctly sitting in the car with my mom one day having a conversation about my life. And this is when she didn't know, and I wanted so bad to tell her, but I was so ashamed that I couldn't. But when I finally did end up it all came to a head and I told my parents, they didn't believe me. They didn't believe me at first until I showed them the scars on my arms, and they had no choice but to believe me. And so they looked around and wondered, how do we help her? They had no clue. So what we did was, the next day we went to a Suboxone clinic, and I started them on the Suboxone. And it helps with the withdrawals, but it's still not fun at best. I detoxed in my parents' house for like 7 days, just sweating and puking and can't sleep, and it was just awful. And after that, I stayed on the Suboxone for a while, but I still felt alone. Nobody was teaching me how to live life on life's terms. Nobody was teaching me how to live without the use of drugs. I was going to see a counselor, and I was doing a group counseling session once a week, but it was more of a in, out, done kind of thing. It wasn't anything in depth where I really talked about much or talked about my feelings at all. And eventually one day I ended up losing my job that I had at the time, and I went out and I used. And I found out that I could take my medication to the dope man and trade him out. And I could get rid of my feelings again. When my parents found out about that, they showed me some tough love. And I know it was probably one of the hardest things they ever had to do, but they kicked me out of their house. I didn't have a car. I still had one of my jobs, but I was out of luck. Found a place to stay with a friend, which I will forever be grateful to her because I know all she was trying to do was help. But I was on this kick of, I'm a tough girl, I can do this, I'm going to show all of you all how good I can do it. And I remember, like, here recently looking back at some Facebook posts and shaking my head and thinking how dumb I was. Because I still didn't know how to do life. So, a series of events led me back to a really destitute place. And God gave me the gift of desperation. And only in desperation did I ask myself, is the drugs the problem? Is that really what the problem is? Because I thought that was my solution. But it wasn't. My solution had turned into my problem. And so, once again, I asked for help. And I went to detox again. And I went, and the last people I expected to be there were my parents, because they had kind of written me off, or so I thought. I wasn't allowed to talk to my little sister, and she's my world. And all I really wanted was my family back, to know that somebody still believed in me. And they were there at the treatment center waiting for me, and I didn't know they were going to be there. And I still wasn't very nice to them. I was mad at the time because I didn't see it as tough love. I just thought they were being mean. But another series of events led me to the healing place, where I sat in a detox for 6 days. And again, it was awful. But this time it was cold turkey. No medication whatsoever. And I went and I stayed, and when I walked into that place, my mom told me, "Abby, you look like you're from a concentration camp." I sat down on the curb outside the healing place to smoke a cigarette before I went in, and I couldn't get up. I couldn't walk in there, and I called my mom and asked her to come out there and help me. And I went in, and I laid down on my detox bed, and these girls that were there were just like me. They gave me a little bit of hope. They told me I could do it. They told me to just sit still for 5 more minutes. Just give it 5 more minutes. Just one more night. You'll be okay, I promise. And I remember laying in bed many a night asking God, please help me. And I remember the note that my mom handed me from my little sister, begging me to get some help. Begging me to get better so I could be the sister I used to be to her. She gave me a pillow pet and told me to hold on to it when I missed her, because that's what I gave her when I left for college. And it gave me just enough hope to sit still. I was done living the life where I didn't have dreams, I didn't have hopes, I couldn't see tomorrow. It was just living right now. And so I sat in the women's healing place for 6 days, and I called my parents when I was let out of detox, and they told me they'd come and get me, and then they didn't, and I didn't know what to do. But I knew that I sure as heck was not staying there. So I left, and I didn't know where I was going, didn't know where I was sleeping, didn't have any money, didn't have anything. I had a TARP pass that one of the girls at the healing place had given me. I've never read the TARP, by the way. Didn't know what to do with that. So I ended up making my way to a recovery house. And only God brought me to that recovery house. And I got there, and they told me that I could stay. And I remember thinking, who wants a junkie like me to stay in their house? And I didn't want to stay. I went to the hood, okay? I've lived out here in Oldham County since I was 13, and I went to the hood. And I remember trying to think of any way and every way out of that place. But something told me, just like those girls at the healing place, just sit still. So that's what I did, and I never left. They didn't ask me for money or tell me that I had to do anything. I could just stay. And I did. And I looked around, and I remember thinking, something's going on here. Something different is going on here. And these people taught me how to live. We call it the we. And there's power in the we, because they're people just like me. They don't know how to deal with feelings and emotions. They don't know how to live without drugs, but together we can do something that we couldn't do by ourselves. These people, I remember them talking and telling their stories to me, and I could relate and think, that story's not just like mine, but it's close. I can remember those feelings and those days. And so those people became my family. They're my second step family. So I stayed at the second step house, and I love it there. They've taught me a lot of different things about life and about how to deal. We go to meetings together at least 5 times a week. We share with each other our experience, strength, and hope. And if you open your mouth with a problem, usually somebody else has had a problem just like that. and somebody's going to give you some advice. And while I stayed there, I've gotten my life back. I can dream today, I can hope today, I can look at next month or next year and tell you where I think I'll be. Might not end up exactly how I hope, but I'm going somewhere today. They've shown me how to have a relationship with my family, and they're back in my life. Better than they probably ever have been. I get along with them today, and I can call them up and talk to them, go have dinner with them, and actually, sometimes they let me pay for dinner. And if you know my dad, he doesn't like to let other people pay. But I have a lot of gratitude for my parents because they showed me that tough love that I needed. I have a lot of gratitude for the Second Step House and for what recovery's given me. I know today that I don't have to put anything in my body to just feel okay. My first clean date was August 13th. That's the day I entered the healing place. And relapse is part of my story. On November 19th, I decided to use again. But they told me that that was okay. We're going to get through this. You're going to be all right. And here's the steps that you need to take to make sure you're all right. Because recovery takes work. Every day is not easy. It's a struggle every day. But recovery's given me the tools that every day I know I can make it through and not use no matter what. The program I work only gives you one promise. That's freedom from active addiction, that any addict can stop using, lose the desire, and find a new way to live. And that's what I'm doing today. So I can proudly stand up here and tell you guys that I have 106 days clean today. And I never, ever, ever feel like
It doesn't make it easy to follow up. Abby, I love you. And loving her sometime during all of this was hard. I have to say thank you to a lot of people in Oldham County, like going to the county attorney's office. What do I do? How do I do it? Going to a lot of different places, getting advice from a lot of different people. We took a route with Abby that was longer than we thought, but now that I hear a lot of other stories, a lot shorter than a lot of other families. She talked about the fact that, we've got a daughter who got 1B in high school, teaching Sunday school class, and we never thought we'd be where we were at. We did think she had an eating disorder. I shouldn't say it that way, but sorry. The deal is that when I look at what we've been through, I just say, when we first did it, I Googled all night, trying to figure out what was the heroin, what did it do, what were the effects. As we went through there, I got to talk to a lot of people. On the phone, you can get so much, but if it happens to friends or other things going on in your personal family, talk to people face to face. Because when you show up at some of these places and say, I want to talk to you, you get to speak to the head of the healing place, or you get to talk to the people at JDAC, or you get to talk to the county attorney, or you get to talk to those people. Because you know what? I knew I had to figure out how to help my daughter. I also say if you're in a two-parent family and you're one of those two parents, sometimes you're going to make mistakes, but back each other up, because you'll need each other more than you probably needed each other in your whole life. So give a lot of forgiveness not only to a child that's in the midst of it, but also to your spouse. I can say that there's a lot of things that I wish I would have heard, and that's from some friends who said, I have a nephew who said, oh, Willie, I thought that's what was going on with Abby. Why didn't you tell me? We had another person on the other side of the family. Oh, well, I thought that might be what's going on. Then why didn't you tell me? I had one friend who said, are you sure that Abby's it's not a drug problem? No, I don't think so. Speak up. Sometimes you may have to risk a little bit, but it may be worth it. I don't want to steal a lot of things that my wife's going to say, so I'll leave it at that and just say, look for help, educate yourself, and support each other. Natalie?
I need notes. I'm Natalie, the mother of an addict, and that's something I never dreamed I'd be saying, but it's true. It's also true that I'm the mother of a child allergic to penicillin, a son who's slightly overweight, and yet another who gets frustrated with math. There was a day that I would have readily shared any of those three situations with you, but withheld the truth about Abby. But that day is no more. I'm here to tell you that addiction is no more shameful than any of these other issues. When my youngest daughter is sick and I take her to the doctor, I remind the doctor she's allergic to penicillin. I provide my son with wholesome, low-calorie foods to help him lose weight. I take my child who lacks confidence in math to a tutor to help her conquer her math assignments. And for our child who struggled with addiction, we sought help. Addiction requires treatment, not denial, not embarrassment or blame. It has been a difficult journey, weighing the options, talking to others who've walked this path, searching for answers, pleading for help, praying desperately, crying myself to sleep some nights, wondering how we got here. We haven't been alone. Well, we were alone at first because I was embarrassed. What parent doesn't blame themselves? But don't try to fool yourself with a thought, like you've heard Abby said. My kid would never try drugs because she's a straight A student. She teaches Sunday school. She's in youth group. Our daughter did all those things. We never dreamed she'd try drugs, let alone become addicted. Self-inflicted perfectionism, peer pressure, and curiosity, they were all strong forces. Slowly, we began to open up, and with that action, we found others, first medical professionals, and slowly other families. No one wants to broadcast these family struggles to others, but it would be selfish of us to allow someone else to walk this path and not share the pain we've experienced and step forward and offer some hope. Like all medical issues, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but the first step for everyone is to admit there's a problem. It could be the addict, but in our case, it was Rob and I who finally realized the real truth of the situation. Our daughter had become a stranger we didn't recognize. Physically, she was too thin, anorexic looking. Emotionally, she was volatile one minute and lethargic the next. She became secretive and resistant to interaction. Although there were a couple of friends, like Rob said, he had a friend who was willing to challenge us and ask the question, do you think your daughter is using drugs? Most said nothing. Even my own sister, whose son, who had been addicted to heroin, wouldn't challenge me on this. She was afraid to ask the question. So I tell you, open that door. Don't be afraid to ask your friend or loved one that difficult question. You might save a life. You might save a family. After we admitted the problem, we sought a solution. And as I said, there's no one-size-fits-all. There's inpatient, outpatient, medication, detox, individual and group counseling. There are all options. And relapse is always possible, sometimes more than once. What worked for Abby might not work for your loved one. One of the best pieces of advice in all of this that I received was, don't love your daughter to death. Ultimately, she had to admit there was a problem and want to solve it. Some families that we've come in contact with constantly prevented their loved one from experiencing the consequences of their addiction. An addict may pawn everything they own. Eventually, they may have no place to live, no car or no job. Stealing is common to fund an addict's lifestyle. The consequence can be jail. Too many families keep picking the addict up, dusting them off, and enabling them to go do it all again. These actions may provide the experience of death for the addict because there's just enough help being provided that they can go get high one more time. Loss of a job, homelessness, and jail are not the end of the world. That's what I decided. There are consequences that can be the wake-up call to bring your loved one around to the reality that they are addicted. There were days when Rob was the strong one and he had to keep my chin up. Other times I had to encourage him that we were loving our daughter by letting her choose. It was hard, the hardest thing we have ever done. But the day came that we drove a scared, angry young girl to detox at the healing place, and we were met with people who'd been in her shoes and wanted the best for her. She admitted there was a problem, and she wanted help. That was the beginning of recovery for Abby. There have been other days that have been hard since then, and there'll be more. Each day brings more support and hope for all of us. Recovery from addiction is a daily mindset. Every day requires a choice of life over the drug. Abby has given me some courage to stand here today, and I'm so proud of her for sharing her story. And thank you for coming tonight.